All right, welcome in, everyone. We've got some really interesting listener mail for this deep dive. It's about Ohio's 12th Congressional District race.
Yeah, this one's got some layers to it for sure.
Yeah, like on the surface, it seems like kind of your classic David and Goliath story.
Right.
But there are some twists here that, at least for me, make it a lot more interesting. So
Yeah.
we've got this Democratic candidate, Jerrad Christian. And just for starters, he's not like your average guy running for office.
Definitely not the typical politician, that's for sure.
I mean, the guy's a software engineer,
Right.
owned a small business,
Yeah.
Navy veteran. Like, how many more boxes can you tick?
Well, and he's running a pretty unique campaign, too, focusing on things that don't always get a lot of attention in these races.
Like what?
Well, he's talking a lot about things like healthcare and the environment and personal freedom.
Mm.
These are issues that tend to resonate with voters across party lines,
Mm.
which is interesting, especially in a district that, Trump won pretty handily twice.
Yeah, that's what I mean about David and Goliath. I mean, we're talking about a district that's been reliably red for, like, forever. The incumbent, Troy Balderson, he has a serious track record of wins.
He does. But there are a few things that make this race stand out. For one, the district actually voted to protect abortion rights in that recent amendment,
Right.
even though Balderson opposed it.
Huh.
Interesting. And Christian, on the other hand, he was a big supporter.
So maybe that's a sign that things are shifting a little bit?
Could be.
Voters might be more open to, considering someone who's not a Republican?
Potentially. And what's interesting is how Christian's approaching this. He's not just, playing to his base.
Yeah.
He's reaching out to Republican voters, trying to find that common ground.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so one thing we definitely have to talk about is this postcard campaign. Like, have you ever heard of a candidate doing something like this?
I mean, it's pretty uncommon, to say the least.
Just asking voters to, like, share what they need, what they're worried about.
Right. It's a pretty clever way to flip the script on how these campaigns usually go.
Right, because usually it's all about the candidate broadcasting their message and, trying to convince everyone to vote for them.
Exactly.
This is totally different.
Totally. It's more about listening than talking, in a way.
Right.
It's kind of refreshing, actually.
Definitely. But here's where things get really interesting, at least to me. Apparently, the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, they're not backing Christian.
Yeah, they've decided to focus their resources elsewhere this cycle.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
Why not support a candidate who seems to be gaining some traction in such a tough district? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Well, some people think they just don't see him as a viable contender.
You mean they think he can't win?
Right. They're playing it safe, focusing on races they think are more winnable.
Which is kind of ironic, right?
So.
Because if Christian does win, and he does it without their help,
Right.
well, that kind of sends a message, doesn't it?
Definitely. It would suggest that maybe the establishment doesn't always know best.
Exactly.
That sometimes real change comes from the ground up.
Yeah. Like maybe those small dollar donations and that community organizing, that maybe that matters more than whatever the, big party machine is doing.
Yeah. It's an interesting thought, for sure.
So to kind of recap here, we've got a candidate with this, like, incredibly diverse background, running a campaign that's all about listening to voters, building bridges, things that you don't always see in politics.
Right.
And he's challenging an incumbent in a district that's been, a Republican stronghold forever.
Right.
But it's a district that's also showing signs of maybe wanting something different.
Potentially.
And to top it all off, he's doing it without the support of the DCCC.
Yep. It's a fascinating story, for sure.
Yeah. So where do we go from here?
Well, I think it's worth taking a closer look at some of the specifics of Christian's campaign strategy, because he's doing some really innovative things with technology and social media to connect with voters. And I think that's where we might see some of those democratic values that we were talking about earlier really come into play.
All right. So let's dig in.
Sounds good.
This is turning into a really fascinating deep dive.
Yeah, it is. One of the articles that you sent, it goes into Christian's digital strategy.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really interesting. He's not just using social media like as a megaphone, just to blast out his message.
Right.
He's actually using it to have conversations with voters to get their feedback, to answer their questions.
So it's kind of like an extension of that postcard campaign.
Exactly. Like, remember how we were talking about how refreshing it is that he's actually listening to voters?
Yeah.
Well, he's taking that same approach online. And I think that really aligns with the Democratic Party's focus on accessibility and transparency.
Okay, so how's he actually doing that?
Well, For one thing, he's made it really easy for people to respond to those postcards online. They can go to his website or they can use social media. And it's not just like a one-way street. People can actually share their stories, connect with other voters who are concerned about the same things.
Yeah.
So it creates this sense of community, this shared purpose, which is something you don't always see in politics these days.
No, you're right. It often feels very much like us versus them.
Exactly. And I think Christian is trying to break down those barriers to create a space where people can actually talk to each other, listen to each other, and hopefully find some common ground.
Yeah, that's something that the Democratic Party has always been really good at. That whole idea of bringing people together, building coalitions.
Right. It's about recognizing that even though we might have different opinions on certain issues, we still share a lot of the same values, the same goals.
And it seems like that's what Christian's trying to do in this race. Like, he's not shying away from the fact that he's a progressive,
No.
but he's also not alienating voters who might be more moderate or even conservative.
It's a tough balancing act.
It is. So how's he doing that?
Well, he's really focusing on the things that unite us rather than the things that divide us. You know, he talks a lot about the need for affordable health care,
Right.
protecting the environment, ensuring that every child has access to a good education.
Those are things that pretty much everyone can agree on, right?
At least in theory. I think the way he talks about these issues is really important. He's not just throwing out slogans.
No.
He's actually connecting these issues to people's everyday lives.
Okay.
You know, he talks about how access to affordable health care isn't just some abstract political debate. It's about whether or not you can take your kid to the doctor when they're sick, whether or not you can afford to get the treatment you need.
Right.
He talks about how protecting the environment isn't just about saving polar bears. It's about making sure that our kids and grandkids have clean air to breathe and clean water to drink.
So he's making it personal.
Exactly. And I think that's what resonates with people.
Yeah. It's one thing to talk about these issues in the abstract. It's another thing to make people feel like these issues matter to them, to their families, to their communities.
Right. And it looks like it's working, at least for some voters.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the articles you sent said that he's already raised over $150,000.
Wow.
And most of that has come from small dollar donations.
Huh. So that means that a lot of people are chipping in, $5 here, $10 there.
Exactly.
That's pretty impressive.
It is, especially considering that he's not getting any support from the DCCC.
Right. We talked about that. It's actually kind of a mixed bag, isn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, on the one hand, it's great that he's able to raise so much money without their help.
Right. It shows that he has grassroots support.
But on the other hand, it does raise questions about whether the Democratic establishment really believes that he can win.
True. And, Balderson, his opponent, he's not going to let that go unnoticed.
Yeah.
He'll definitely try to use that against Christian. He'll say that Christian is too extreme, too out of touch with the mainstream, that even his own party doesn't support him.
But maybe that'll backfire.
You think so?
I don't know. It's just a thought. But voters are pretty skeptical of the establishment these days,
That's true.
Like, they're tired of the partisan bickering. They're tired of the same old faces, the same old arguments.
I think you might be onto something. Voters are looking for something different, something authentic.
And maybe Christian, with his unconventional background and his willingness to, challenge the status quo, maybe that's what they're looking for.
It's possible. I mean, think about that vote on the abortion rights amendment.
Right.
The district voted in favor of protecting abortion rights.
Even though Balderson opposed it.
Right. So maybe, just maybe, this district is more in play than people realize.
It's like you said earlier, things might be shifting.
They might be. And if Christian can convince voters that he's the real deal, that he's actually there to represent them, not just the party or special interests, then he might have a real shot at winning.
Okay, so we've talked about Christian's digital strategy, his grassroots support, the fact that the DCCC isn't backing him. But I think we need to zoom out a little bit and think about the bigger picture. Like, how might national trends play into this race?
Well, we're definitely in a very polarized political climate right now.
Yeah.
Trust in institutions is low, and partisan divides are really deep. And that makes it really hard for any candidate to reach voters who might not already agree with them.
So how does a Democrat, a progressive Democrat running in a traditionally Republican district, how does he overcome that?
By focusing on the things that unite us rather than the things that divide us.
Like those core democratic values that we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. Things like fairness, opportunity, community.
Like passion.
Yeah, comparison. Those are things that everyone can relate to, regardless of their political affiliation.
Okay, but how do you actually make that happen? Like, how do you reach voters who are so entrenched in their own beliefs?
By listening to them, by understanding their concerns.
And by talking to them about how those concerns are connected to those broader values.
Exactly. It's about having real conversations, not just shouting at each other from across the political divide.
Right. So maybe Christian's background, the fact that he's not a career politician, maybe that's actually an advantage in this climate.
It could be. I mean, he's a software engineer,
Right.
small business owner.
An AV veteran.
Like, he's someone who's used to solving problems, to getting things done.
And maybe that's what voters are looking for. Someone who's practical, someone who's results-oriented.
Someone who's not just talking about change, but who's actually lived it.
Exactly. Okay, so that's a pretty compelling story.
It is. But is it enough to overcome all of the challenges that he's facing? I mean, this is still a very Republican district.
Right. But here's the thing. I think people are hungry for something different, something better. And Christian's campaign, it's offering this vision of like a future where we can actually come together, where we can solve problems, where we can create a more just and equitable society.
That's a message that resonates with Democrats, obviously. But I think it might also resonate with a lot of voters who are just tired of the way things are.
Tired of the gridlock, the negativity, the lack of progress.
Yeah. People want to believe that things can get better.
And maybe Christian can give them that hope.
Maybe he can. We'll have to wait and see how it all plays out.
But one thing's for sure, this race is a microcosm of the challenges and the opportunities that we're facing as a country.
Right.
Like, it's a test of whether we can bridge our divides, find common ground, build a better future together.
And it's a reminder that even in the most unexpected places, even in the most difficult circumstances, change is possible.
It's kind of wild to think about this race in the context of, like, everything else that's going on in politics right now.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this trend of outsider candidates kind of shaking things up, and sometimes they actually win.
Yeah. People are definitely disillusioned with the establishment. They want something different.
They do. They want something authentic. And I think Christian's story, the fact that he's not a career politician, the fact that he's so committed to those, those core democratic values,
right,
it really speaks to that desire for change.
Yeah. And it's not just that he's, an outsider.
Right.
He's not afraid to, challenge the system, even within his own party.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that the DCC isn't supporting him,
right,
that's a pretty big deal.
It is. It kind of makes you wonder what the Democratic Party is, what they're really all about these days.
Well, they're in a tough spot, right? They
Yeah.
need to win elections.
Of course.
But they also need to stay true to their values.
It's like, if they only support candidates who are, super moderate,
right,
they risk alienating their base. The people who are actually going to go out and knock on doors and make phone calls.
Exactly. And Christian, he's running on a platform that's pretty progressive.
He is.
He's talking about things like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal.
Right.
These are issues that really energize the Democratic base.
But those issues can also be a little bit polarizing.
They can.
Yeah.
Especially in a district that's historically lean Republican.
So how do you balance that?
Well, I think Christian's betting that authenticity is going to win out.
Interesting.
Like, he's not trying to water down his message.
No.
He's not trying to hide who he is.
He's just being himself.
Right. And he's hoping that voters will respect that, even if they don't agree with him on everything.
It's a gamble.
It is. But it's a gamble that might just pay off, especially if he can connect those, those progressive values to the everyday concerns of voters in his district.
Give me an example.
Okay, so he talks a lot about how access to affordable health care is essential for small businesses to thrive.
Right.
That's an argument that could appeal to both Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, it makes sense.
He also talks about how fighting climate change is about protecting Ohio's natural resources, about creating jobs in the clean energy sector.
So he's taking these big kind of abstract issues,
right,
and he's making them real for people.
Exactly. He's showing them how these issues affect their lives, their families, their communities.
And that's what makes this race so fascinating to me. It's like a test case for whether a progressive message can work in a place that's, that's not exactly a bastion of liberalism.
Right. It's a test of whether someone who's willing to challenge the status quo can actually build a winning coalition.
And it's a reminder that even in these, these incredibly divisive times, change is still possible.
Yeah, I agree. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the question we're left with is, will Christian's approach work? Will he be able to defy the odds and flip this district?
Good question.
Or will he come up short, proving that the old rules of politics still apply?
We'll have to wait and see. But this is definitely a race worth watching.
It is. It's a glimpse into the future of American politics.
Yeah, it is. And it's a reminder that even in the most unexpected places, hope is still alive.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Ohio's 12th Congressional District.
And until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep engaging.